The Barbican complex, often simply known as the Barbican, is one of London's most distinctive areas. It's a huge 35-acre complex of homes, shops, arts venues and local facilities, all connected together by walkways. Some people love it, some people hate it. The Barbican is one of the oldest districts of London, mostly sitting just outside the ancient city walls. You can see exactly how much of it sits outside the walls because the ruins of the walls themselves are preserved within the complex. The word Barbican refers to a fort. It likely comes from the Latin Barbicana, and the original walls were indeed Roman. This church, St. Giles without Cripplegate, is named after the fact that it was outside one of the old city gates. Indeed, the area that the Barbican covers is largely Cripplegate, and maybe a little bit of Aldersgate. This was, for centuries, a poor and crowded area. The main industries were the cloth trade, which to some extent still exists over in nearby Spitalfields, and metalworking. There was also a large Jewish cemetery, which until 1177 was the only Jewish cemetery in Britain. However, being just outside the city walls put people just outside of the reach of the city authorities, so the area became popular with the sort of people who don't like a lot of regulation. It was a district popular for entertainment, but also with a strong criminal element. The Great Fire of London in 1666 destroyed much of the city, but left Cripplegate largely intact. The new houses in the city drew wealthier residents away, leaving only the poor here. New industries moved in, exploiting cheap land and cheap labour. Warehouses and factories began to appear in the 18th and 19th centuries. It was the Second World War that brought an abrupt end to the centuries of history around here. In 1940 the area was subjected to heavy bombing that virtually destroyed Cripplegate. In 1951 there were just 48 people listed as living here. London as a whole had seen many changes throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, and perhaps the most important was the coming of public transport, particularly railways, that enabled people who worked in the city to live out in the suburbs. Consequently, the population of the city proper had declined significantly, with the destruction of these districts only hastening the process. Therefore, the Corporation of London perceived a need for more housing. They were assisted by the Town and Country Planning Act of 1947, which enabled them to buy up areas of land in order to create large-scale projects. Towns that could be planned as a whole rather than piecemeal. The first development in the area was the Golden Lane Estate, which opened in 1957. This was social housing and was intended from the start to be high density. However, it was also aimed at younger single people and couples rather than families. The architects were Powell, Chamberlain and Bonn, and the estate was generally considered a success. It was an exciting new form of living for what felt like a new dawn for Britain. The Barbican complex right next door was essentially an evolution of the Golden Lane Estate. The architects were again Powell, Chamberlain and Bonn. But this was intended to attract a different clientele. Golden Lane had attracted a number of young professionals. The Barbican was squarely, definitively aimed at professionals. It would include housing suitable for families as well as singles and couples. The architect described their intended market as the kind of people with a taste for Mediterranean holidays, French cuisine and Scandinavian design, and the rents would match that market. This would certainly not be subsidised housing. Work was begun in 1963, and the complex epitomises the philosophies then prevalent in urban planning. There was a strong influence from Le Corbusier, the Swiss architect. Le Corbusier's ideas are complex, but one of the key points was that he believed in architecture that was practical rather than ornate. More specifically, he believed in architecture that would be raised off the ground, separated from the roads. Housing and transportation, in his opinion, should not coexist. Housing is the destination, the roads are how you get there. Never the twain shall meet. He also popularised the concept of the high-rise block, for better or for worse. The specific architectural style employed in the Barbican, for which it is famous, is Brutalism. The term was coined by the architects Alison and Peter Smithson, who, ironically, had their bid to build the Golden Lane estate rejected. Brutalism is a kind of offshoot from Le Corbusier's no-frills architectural philosophy, incorporating simple but bold outlines and modularity. The materials should speak for themselves, brutalist buildings making much use of concrete and glass. Le Corbusier's notion that roads and people should be separated ties into another element that the Barbican makes much use of, the concrete walkways. In post-war London it was popularly believed that the car would be king. Public transport would have its uses, but really the wave of the future consisted of knocking everything down and running a motorway through it. As part of this, the corporation planned a network of pedways, concrete walkways at first floor level separated from the roads. Ground level would be for motor vehicles only. This scheme really didn't take off for various reasons, one of the most obvious being that London had been built on the ground, and it was a pain in the backside to keep going up and down all the time. The Barbican, though, was a whole-cloth development, incorporating very little of what had been there before, so the architects just went absolutely nuts with walkways. Apparently they took inspiration from Venice, which might explain the occasional body of water seen about the place, but not much else. The Barbican estate's housing opened between 1969 and 1976. It might have been finished sooner, but in the 1970s, industrial disputes were kind of the British national sport, so construction was held up. Also holding construction up was the need to correct flaws in the design. There are 2,000 residential units, consisting of studios, flats, and maisonettes. Unusually for the time, there was no gas installed. My initial thought was that perhaps this was the result of the gas explosion that destroyed part of the Ronan Point block in Canning Town. But that happened in 1968, which I suspect was a little late to affect the design brief. The complex is not just the Barbican estate, but also the Barbican Centre, an arts venue that opened in 1982. It includes 2 theatres, a concert hall, 7 conference halls, 2 exhibition halls, a library, 3 restaurants, 3 cinema screens, and an art gallery. Related, but not technically part of the centre, is the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. The centre is a major international arts venue, as you might imagine. It's also perhaps the most breathtaking part of the complex, with its artificial lake and high-level walkways. The centre was originally budgeted at £14 million, but eventually came to a cost of £160 million, which must have been very embarrassing for all concerned. I should also mention the Museum of London, which currently sits on the edge of the complex, but will soon be moving to Smithfield, and the City of London Girls' School, which is near to the aforementioned St Giles Cripplegate. Along with St Giles, another old building incorporated into the complex is the Ironmongers Hall. The complex divides opinion. The Queen declared the Barbican Centre one of the modern wonders of the world. However, in 2003 it was voted London's ugliest building. The whole centre was Grade 2 listed in 2001 as an outstanding example of brutalist architecture and urban planning. It's a curious place to walk around, often quite confusing in its layout. The boundaries between public and private space, and even indoors and outdoors, are often unclear. In many ways, he said controversially, it epitomises everything that's wrong with post-war urban planning. It has little consideration for history, it applies concepts that have since fallen out of fashion, and it feels quite boxed in. In some areas it's broad and windswept, and in others it's verging on claustrophobic. Yet it's never suffered from the kind of problems that plagued other estates in London. And I suspect, being cynical, that the reason comes down to money. As I said, from the start, this place was intended for professionals, for successful people who were already quite well off. Rents were higher, and so the money they had could go into the kind of care and maintenance that other council estates were often denied. Build quality, too, could be higher from the start, none of the cost-cutting that blighted many developments at the time. Nor was the estate ever used as a convenient place to stick problem tenants. With the kind of residents in the Barbican, the worst you might get is a brutal insider trading. There have been various refurbishments and alterations carried out over the years, but on the whole the place hasn't changed that much over the decades. The biggest change, arguably, was a political one. 1980 brought the right to buy scheme by which council tenants could buy their homes. Many tenants did indeed take advantage of this. These days, a flat in the complex will set you back quite a bit of blunt. The rent on a studio flat is over £300 a week, and to purchase will set you back at least £500,000. Ironically, one of the poorest parts of London has now become one of the most expensive. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please do click the like button and consider subscribing for more. I've done a few videos on London's estates, and this is one people have been asking about for quite a while. Thanks as always to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the iron bars to my concrete slabs. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.